That is music. Welcome to History of England, episode 42, Two Queens. Now, I know you haven't talked for a few weeks, so I just want to kind of remind you, last time we met, I talked about the last years of Mary I. And I talked about the Oxford Martyrs and the War of France, which went way wrong, and Calais being captured from England, ending the Plantagenet Empire once and for all. I talked about the death of Mary I and the rise into power of her stepsister, Elizabeth I, as queen. I talked about the early moves Elizabeth made, making good appointments to a privy council, and how she fell by religion, and finally the Elizabethan Settlement. Now, the Elizabethan Settlement, as it came to be known, was meant to be a middle course. Radical left here, conservative right here, middle course. But it was not popular. The Catholic bishops and the House of Lords were opposed to the measures, and the Act of Uniformity, which introduced once more the Book of Common Prayer, passed the House of Lords by only 3 votes. In Westminster Hall, a debate was held between Catholics and Protestants, and it settled nothing. Afterwards, Elizabeth was forced to imprison 2 Catholic bishops in order to prevent them from excommunicating her publicly. Now, this helped diminish the opposition to her in the House of Lords. The Commons were committed to the proposals, but the Lords were hostile to them, and in the end, it was an extremely close vote that passed all of the settlement. Now, Elizabeth wished to calm any debate in England. She made it a goal for herself to create a broad consensus that would allow the Orthodox and the Reformers to live peacefully with each other. The settlement didn't please either party. The Catholics did not like the reversal of the late Mary I policies. The Reformers said that the settlement kept the Church of England attached very loosely to the papacy. Now, on the far left were the Puritans. The Puritans attacked the settlement in a broadside describing the Book of Common Prayer as a book that had been taken for the most part from the Catholic Mass and only had a few terms replacing a few sentences here and there. But you must remember, Elizabeth was trying to pass a mixed religious policy, trying to pass something that relied upon compromise and commendations. The constitution of the church was largely unchanged. The liturgy was a mixed bag of ancient, medieval, Lutheran, Calvinist aspects. Protestant is preaching, Catholic is an intention to ritual. Now, the Anglican Church, even today, is not considered to be a member of the Reformed churches. It is a member of the Protestant denomination, but there is no uniform theology that was passed, and it is not at all Reformed, really. It was meant to hold on to as many worshippers as before and not lose any. So Elizabeth was a very cautious queen when it came to this. Late in her reign, she stated she only cared about outward conformity to the English church for the sake of order. All English were obliged to attend their parish churches every week and on the high holy days. If you were absent, you would be fined a shilling. England had changed its religion 4 times in 20 years, and now it stopped changing. Elizabeth never allowed anyone to meddle with what she had done, and it's remained that way pretty much ever since. It is a very English settlement. Practical rather than speculative, bringing together materials that otherwise might not work together. It introduced compromise and toleration. It introduced a fair amount of ambiguity. Its very lack of clarity saved it. In London, the Reformers were allowed to preach predestination and justification by faith alone. In York, the faithful were allowed to pray on their beads. Elizabeth didn't care about any of that. She only cared that there was a settlement that would maintain order and unite her subjects. She did not wish to lose the support of Lutheran princes in Germany, but she did not wish to anger the Catholic kings of France and Spain. The religion of the people, remember, had a very significant foreign context. Now, in late April 1559, knowing that Elizabeth was going to dissolve Parliament soon, Thomas Gargrave, the Speaker of the House of Commons, asked permission to present to Queen Elizabeth a petition that was of vital importance to the realm. This petition contained the wish that she should marry and bear an heir to the throne. Only in that way would peace and stability be maintained, and only through that way would the throne be protected from foreign enemies. She listened politely, then stated she wished to remain a virgin, and said she feared that a male heir might wish to supplant her when he grew up, which was actually a pretty smart move. She then took from her finger her coronation ring and stated she had been given the ring on the solemn condition that she was married to the realm and would take no other partner. She knew that her mother, Anne Boleyn, and her stepsister Mary had married, and their marriages had proven to be dangerous, and she had even talked to one of the royal doctors who told her she may not be able to withstand the strain of childbirth. She also stated that Felipe II, King of Spain, had already proposed marriage, and she was graciously evading it instead of denying it outright. That direct refusal would come later, when she finally told him she could not marry him as she was a Protestant, but again, that was later. On May 8th, 1559, Parliament was dissolved. Now, she had done well with her first Parliament. The Holy Sacrament was no longer in the Royal Chapel, the Mass was being said in English, the bishops who stated they would not swear the oath of supremacy were earmarked to lose their sees, and the Queen promised she would soon go on to progress and appoint her own people to the vacant sees when doing so. There were no more monks, no more nuns in England, the statue of the Virgin and the saints were once more gone from the niches, and the crucifix was gone from the Rue Louvre. The new liturgy was slowly, grudgingly being said, and by the time she died, it would be the heart of the Church of England. The heretics of Mary who had survived her realm were freed from prison. But the people of the North had made it clear they did not care for this new Book of Common Prayer. And again, whispers of rebellion were being heard once more. But, the North is always in rebellion. So really, Now Elizabeth, with the help of Cecil and her privy councils, had successfully maneuvered between the Papists on the right and the radical clergy on the left. She was emerging as a symbol of the nation. She had suffered under the reign of Mary I. She lived among dangers. She had been a prisoner. And she said England had been a prisoner under Mary. And now, just like England, she had triumphed. She had been successfully crowned queen, despite being female. At court, she presided over a largely male community of 1,500 people. And she had to learn to dominate their wholly male council. But she was a natural diplomat. She spoke classical Latin, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. She was smart and witty, willful, and impulsive. She was feared more than her late half-sister, and she gave orders with as much authority as her late father, King Henry VIII. She was the Virgin Queen of England. She was willing to accept this as her fate and her memorial. In the summer of 1559, she issued a series of injunctions in matters concerning religion. Liturgy was to be recited in English. An English Bible was to be placed in every church. Images and monuments were to be removed from the walls, the windows of churches, and from now on there's be no more idols. The cult of the saints, prayers of the dead, abolished. But there are still the processions of Rogentide, for instance, when the people would beat the bounds of their parishes and invoke blessings on the fields, and folk were still to be performed. When the name of Jesus was mentioned in church, the people were to take off their hats and bow, and kneel when litany was read. Clergy were supposed to continue to wear the traditional habits, complete with square hats. Wafers, and not bread, were to be used in communion. Songs were to be allowed for church, and all names like heretic and Baptist were forbidden. She was trying to end the differences in England and force peace on the people. But the difference was still evident. On December 19th, 1559, Matthew Parker was installed as Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, he had not wanted the job. He had said it was too big a burden. He had written to Cecil stating this, but Elizabeth insisted that he be rewarded this position because he had supported her late mother as her private chaplain. At the consecration itself, only one bishop wore the legally stipulated vestment of the cope. 2 bishops refused to put on the Romish attire and wore surplices, and a 4th believed that even this was going too far and instead wore the black gown of Geneva. All 14 bishops who had served Mary I were no longer in office. Some of them, including Bishop Bonner, would spend the rest of their lives in prison because they refused to swear the oath of supremacy. And then there's also the matter of Elizabeth's silver crucifix. The Reformers said that was an idol. It had been substituted in place of reverence of God. But Elizabeth refused to remove it from her private chapel. She kept candles burning in front of it at all times. The Reformers tried to get it removed. They forced the Privy Council to tell Elizabeth to remove it, but she said no. The Dean of St. Paul's preached to her on the iniquity of crosses, and she became so angry she yelled at him in church and walked out of the service. 2 times the crucifix was seized and broken up by servants paid to do this. Every time it was replaced in the same position. For Elizabeth, this was a sign of her belief in ritual and order and a way to maintain a relation with Spain and the Vatican. It was a gesture toward the Orthodox subjects, and soon the Catholic requirement for the dead was brought back in altered guise, along with the celebration of communion at funerals. Now, in the spring of 1559, Elizabeth had gone on procession to St. Mary's Spital in the east of London, along with 1,000 men in full armor and accompanied by dancers and 2 white bears in a cart. Religion was no longer to be removed from festival. After the sermon, the animals were baited to death. In London, psalms were being sung in English for the first time since Edward VI had ruled. Also, starting in August, visitations were made by 125 inspectors to travel on 6 separate circuits of England. But see, the peers and gentry nominated for this task were for the most part unwilling to do the job. So they were replaced by lawyers and clerics, most of whom were keen reformers who anticipated general cleansing of the church. And soon after they arrived, they made sure all altars and images were burned in London and Exeter and York and other cities. Vestments, statues, banners, ornaments were thrown into the flames. The visitations were more rigorous in their job than Elizabeth liked, however, and she issued a proclamation that the clergy were to cleanse the churches fully, and only the clergy. Now, in some parts of England, the resistance to changes were still strong, albeit in disguised form. Pictures and images were simply covered up, other vestiges of the old faith hidden. They were biding their time because if Elizabeth died without an heir, the current heir was the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots. It was to be assumed that when she rose to become queen, she would change everything Elizabeth had done. So why remove what would once again be used? The presence of Mary Stuart in the French court emphasized the larger diplomatic problem which Elizabeth and her Privy Council had to deal with. On July 10th, 1559, Henri II died after being wounded in a joust when a fragment of spear had entered his eye, and he ended up dying of sepsis. Can't pronounce that word. Sorry. Now his son Francois II was king of France and Mary was queen. While she was gone from Scotland, the country was ruled by her mother, Mary of Guise, who asked for more troops from France to defy the Protestant lords of Scotland. French troops had been assembled in Normandy, and the French forts on the north bank of the Tweed were being updated. Elizabeth feared invasion. The French court was rumored to be alive with plots to assassinate Elizabeth. The brothers Guise, uncles to Mary, were devising a scheme, it was claimed, to poison Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth herself took precautions. No dish arrived at the table that was not tasted. No glove or handkerchief was given to her without being carefully examined. Every week, Elizabeth was doused with antidotes against every known poison as well. Now, meanwhile, the Scottish Protestant lords had sent an envoy to Elizabeth's court, asking that she send an army to help them remove the French from Scotland. But Elizabeth did not like war, and the rebellion would hurt Mary, Queen of Scots, and this was not to be welcomed because Elizabeth saw Mary as a rightful queen. It was not proper to renounce an anointed sovereign. And she also did not love the Protestants in Scotland. John Knox, the reformer, was their leader, and he made it clear what he thought of female rulers. William Cecil, however, was an ardent Protestant and a bold statesman. He set out a policy that included invading Scotland by the English, and that would remove Mary from the throne. He pushed for this because it would help confront and defy the forces of the Catholics in Europe. It would end the French conspiracy to subvert the English state and the English religion. Elizabeth hesitated. She resisted this plan. She told the Privy Council that she did not wish for war. Cecil said, well, I'll resign if I don't get my way, since he stated Elizabeth was listening to flatterers and cowards instead of proper statesmen like himself. So Elizabeth agreed. She'd send money and a fleet into Firth of Forth. By late December 1559, she agreed to send a small force of troops into Scotland. But much to the fury and resentment of Elizabeth, this force failed in its attack upon the French fortress of Leith, as the scaling ladders were way too short. The English started a siege of the fort, and that did not please Elizabeth. Now Cecil had supported the war, and now he'd be obliged to conclude it. Elizabeth ordered him to make peace with both Scotland and France. He had to obey. On July 5th, 1560, the eventual Treaty of Edinburgh was signed, and it was an honorable truce. Both the English and the French agreed to withdraw their armies from Scotland. Both Mary and Francois II agreed to renounce their claim to the throne of England. England had stood up to France. England had survived. The triumph of the Protestant cause had been proven in England. But there's one slight flaw in the treaty. Mary, Queen of Scots, never signed it. Mary Guise had died on June 11th, 1560, and with the removal of the French from Scotland, the Parliament of Scotland had professed the Protestant faith. Mary refused to agree to this decision, and so the dispute continued in Scotland. Mary Stuart said that Elizabeth had tried to rob Scotland of the allegiance and loyalty of the Scots toward her through the treaty, and so she refused to give up her claim to the throne of England, saying that she was rightful heir. And the most important matter of the realm at this time, again, was the question of who would Elizabeth marry. Philip II was not the only man in Europe pursuing her. She was a queen, after all, and that was an advantage. By the fall of 1560, there were 12 eminent suitors after her. 2 were kings, 2 were archdukes, 5 were dukes, 2 were earls. The lead was taken up by Karl II, Archduke of Austria, and Ferdinand of Austria, the second son of Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. The rear was taken up by Prince Eric of Sweden, the heir to the Swedish throne. Now Elizabeth enjoyed all this attention, but she played coy and dissembled. She never said she would never marry, but she still said, well, if I do marry, I'm going to still stay a virgin. What she said she wanted, she did not want. Her stated intentions are always opposite what she really wanted. So she decided, well, I'll delay on this question. That fall, the Scottish theologian sent her an account of the fall of her mother, including the fact that Anne Boleyn had held up the infant Elizabeth, trying to get Henry VIII to change his mind on her execution. This reminded Elizabeth what marriage could bring. Now, it's likely that because of this memory, she had decided to always remain single. But then again, she may have made up her mind on that subject years before. But in saying she was espoused to England, she was being brave and astonishing. It was inconceivable that a woman would never marry, let alone a queen. Great social prejudice was directed against unmarried females. It went against the great chain of being. It imperiled the safety and existence of the nation. And there was one more person in the race of Elizabeth's hand who was mostly ignored by many, but not Elizabeth. That's Robert Dudley, Master of Horse. Now, he had free rein to see Elizabeth whenever he wished. He was handsome, he was flamboyant, the Queen liked him, maybe even loved him. In the spring of 1560, a rumor arose that she was visiting his chambers every night. And this soon became a scandal. It was whispered that if Dudley's wife were to die, Elizabeth proposed marriage to him. In July, she went on progress along the southern bank of the Thames. Dudley went riding and hunting her every day during that progress, and Cecil began to make it known in court that he was going to resign, since he was no longer being listened to by the Queen. He was a kind of spoiled little brat, wasn't he? Anyway, then on September 8th, 1560, Amy Dudley had died in a mysterious manner. She had fallen down her staircase and broken her neck. Had she been pushed? Had she committed suicide? Queen Elizabeth ordered Dudley to go back home to Kew, where he lingered in a state of shock and anxiety. So he knew what the world would think of this. But you have to remember, he had not lived with his wife for years. Is a political marriage, really. They had lived separate lives. Now, a coroner's jury was convened to look at the matter and concluded that Amy had died by misadventure, which meant accident. But of course, that did not silence the rumors of conspiracy, and some began to whisper that Elizabeth had taken part in a plot to murder Amy Dudley. Now, that's most unlikely. Regardless, Elizabeth would not have been able to marry Dudley after this event anyway. And some even whispered that Cecil had arranged for Amy Dudley to be murdered, so to direct the chance of marriage between him and Elizabeth and damage the reputation of Dudley himself. You know what? I think Cecil could have done that. Now, the nature of the relationship between Elizabeth and Dudley is unknown, this far removed. Elizabeth had been informed by experience and adversity. She was cautious, she was watchful. Would she have courted disaster by having an affair with one of her subjects? Who knows? Now, she was hardly ever alone. She was always with her ladies of the bedchamber and her maids of honor, even when she was asleep, even when she was on the toilet. She was never alone. Any departure from the rigid ceremonial of her life would have been instantly observed. So Cecil now drew a memo for his own use, in which he summarized the relative attractions of Archduke Karl of Austria and Robert Dudley, England's massive horse. The balance sheet was on Karl's side. Karl was rich, Dudley was in debt. Karl was friends with the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Spain, and many dukes. Dudley was only friendly with Elizabeth. Karl was honored by all, Dudley was hated by many. Cecil now considered the matter closed. In January 1561, a friend of Dudley approached the Spanish ambassador with a proposal. If Felipe II was to approve and assist the marriage of Dudley and Elizabeth, then Elizabeth would be willing to look favorably on the reunion with Rome. Cecil found out, reacted quickly, by discovering a popish conspiracy. He arrested and threw in prison several Catholic priests and gentry on the suspicion that they were attending Mass. The public was so happy with this news that Dudley realized that his proposal for a papal reconciliation will be turned down. Now, it seems very unlikely that Elizabeth was aware of Dudley's plans. She was witty, and she had plenty of common sense, and she would have quashed just before Dudley had left the room after he told her about it. Around this time, she made clear she did not wish to be married to anyone again. In her married state, she'd only be queen, but she stayed unmarried. She was king and queen in one. And if she stated that if she was forced to marry, she would renounce the throne and live life as a beggar. Yeah, she was a bit of a blowhard too. Anyway, there's another complication. Lady Katherine Grey, a younger sister of the late Jane Grey, was considered by many to be heir to the throne, and the claims of Mary Stuart were denied. Okay. In November 1560, she married secretly Edward Seymour, the son of the late Lord Protector Seymour. And since she was aligned to the throne and was a lady of the Privy Chamber, she was supposed to ask Elizabeth for permission to marry. And she'd been hiding her affair with Seymour, knowing that Elizabeth would say no. Elizabeth heard the news, had Edward and Catherine sent to the Tower of London to be held on the Queen's pleasure. Now, while in prison, Catherine gave birth to a son, which made stronger her claim to the throne and weakened Elizabeth. Elizabeth said, well, I'm going to declare the boy a bastard, which would deny his claim to the throne. And she was helped in this by Catherine herself, because Catherine lost the marriage license. And she forgot to name the cleric who had married them. A witness she named to the marriage had recently died, so she was not helped there. So the boy was declared a bastard. Catherine was removed from the tower, placed under house arrest until her death in 1567. Then Mary Grey, the younger sister of Catherine and Jane, married without official permission as well, and she was placed under house arrest as well, with the husband thrown into Fleet Prison. The court laughed at this marriage since Mary was a dwarf. The new husband was 6 foot 8 inches tall. There was no threat to the throne there, but Elizabeth did not wish others to have pleasure that she denied herself. And suddenly, all this, there's a further cause of alarm and anxiety. On December 5th, 1560, Francois II died from an ear infection. He left his younger brother Charles as king. that left Mary a childless widow in a country which might not welcome her presence among rival factions at court. Her mother-in-law, Katherine de' Medici, became the regent of France, where her 10-year-old son Charles IX was growing up, and Katherine hated Mary. Mary, in turn, hated her mother-in-law. She said, well, she's a daughter of a merchant, and while many things we said by the Medicis, merchants at that time and place was not one of them. Now, the death of her husband left the Scottish queen with little status and less authority. It was time to think about going back to Scotland, where her position was more assured. Now, both the Catholic faction and the Protestant faction in Scotland sent envoys to her, asking her, come back home to Scotland. The Catholics said, well, if you land on the northern coast, the House of Gordon, a strong Catholic family, would welcome you and guard you on the way to Edinburgh. The Protestants said, well, we don't care where you land. As long as you're willing to make some accommodation with our religion, we'll be happy to see you on the throne. Now, Mary sent an envoy to Elizabeth asking her cousin to allow her permission to land at English port on the way to Scotland. Elizabeth held a public meeting with the envoy and told him no, and told him Mary could expect no favors until she had signed the Treaty of Edinburgh, where her claim to the throne of England was renounced. Now, Mary let it be known she thought it strange that Elizabeth was trying to build hatred against her of her own subjects and hinder her return to Scotland. And she threatened that if Elizabeth did not watch herself, Mary would help the simmering rebellion in England, and stated that since she was 19, she was younger than Elizabeth and thus could last longer. Mary started home on August 15th, 1561, from Calais. Landing at Leith, she began to lament the passing of the pomp and splendor of the French court, for what she would now face in Scotland. She spent the night at the Palace of Holyrood, and was met by a crowd of 500 Calvinists who spent the night singing hymns outside her window. The next day, they threatened her Catholic chaplain, calling him a priest of Baal. Now, just before Mary returned to Scotland, a tragedy occurred in London. The medieval spire of St. Paul's Cathedral is 520 feet from the ground and rose 260 feet from the tower itself. It was made of wood cased with lead. On June 4th, 1561, during a thunderstorm in the city, lightning struck the highest point of the cathedral. At first, all seemed fine, but about 7 in the evening, smoke was seen rising around the ball at the top of the spire. Within a minute, the cross and eagle at the summit of the spire crashed down to the roof and onto the floor of the south transept. The lead casing melted and ran down the tower, and soon the whole church was on fire. Now, people everywhere rushed to the church. The Queen herself saw the fire from Greenwich Palace. She leaned out the window and commanded sailors moored on the Thames to form a bucket line to the church. They did so. They even climbed onto the roof of damp hides to put out the flames. By midnight, the fire was out. The cathedral was a blackened, roofless ruin. Many believed it was an omen, and that it meant a great change would take place. But what the exact change would be, none could say. The cathedral itself was repaired, along with the tower, but the spire was never rebuilt, by the way. Now, some in London blamed the Papists for the fire. Yes, they used that word, even they weren't supposed to. They blamed the Papists for the fire. They stated they used gunpowder to set the fire. Now, earlier that year, a commission and inquiry had been set up in London to investigate those who were still going to Mass, and now a number of Catholic gentry were arrested and charged with necromancy. Some confessed to using black arts, and after being judged personally by Elizabeth, were paraded through the city streets and placed in the pillory. The prophecies of Nostradamus were also invoked. And next year, 20 booksellers were fined for selling his books. So it was extremely unfortunate that while all this was going on, in the fall of 1562, Elizabeth fell ill with a fever. Now, at the time, she was at the Palace of Hampton Court. She took a bath to alleviate the effects of the fever and caught a chill and was diagnosed with smallpox. She was placed in bed and lapsed into a coma. Now, Cecil had been summoned as soon as Elizabeth had fallen ill, and he was told she was dying and would die within a few days. The Privy Council was called and met 24/7 to consider the calamity that faced England. All the doubts, all the divisions of England were discussed as it debated who would succeed Elizabeth. Mary Stuart, not even considered. There could be no Catholic queen. The most favored, but still in disgrace, was Lady Catherine Grey, for even though she had married out Elizabeth's submission, she at least was from the Reformed faith. But Elizabeth lived, and as the fever came down, she woke up. Now she still stated she was dying, and she asked the Privy Council to gather around her bed, and she said, "We'll make Dudley the protector of the realm." She told them she loved him, but invoked God and stated that nothing had ever happened between them. Yet the crisis was over, and she soon recovered. But the fact must be faced that she was mortal, and she would die one day. And when that happened, the successor needed to be in place. But Elizabeth refused to ever again discuss her illness. And again, she refused to discuss who would succeed her. So next time, on History of England, we will examine the 39 steps. As again, England had to deal with the question of religion due to the French wars of religion that were occurring. And we will talk as well about the hatred that rose between Elizabeth I of England and Mary, Queen of Scots. So stay tuned, my friends, because the story is just getting that much better. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.